How are you guys doing? Today is Friday, May 6th, 2022. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an elite individual profile on Chris Paul. The elite starting point guard for the Phoenix Suns is now turning 37, and my intention with this episode is, of course, to lay out Chris Paul's entire career from the moment that he stepped foot on the big stage as a rookie out of Wake Forest. And even I'm going to look at what he's been doing at Wake Forest to give you a full sense of what Chris Paul has been able to do, as Chris Paul is one of the few players who is, I believe, he's timeless on the floor, off the floor. His impact on the game is so vast compared to what he does on the floor individually. Not to mention that he is one of the greatest point guards to ever play. He's one of a handful of players to have 10,000 career assists to his name. He is a player that's made a double-digit amount of all-star games. All of this while Chris Paul just stands barely at 6 feet tall, which should give you a good sense of how good of a basketball player he is. In this episode, I'm going to look and see how he's been able to impact the game on a micro level, game in, game out, season in, season out. Looking at what he's been able to do for his teams. I'm going to take a quick step back and look at how Chris Paul has seriously impacted the game on a macro level. When it's said and done, Chris Paul will definitely be a Hall of Famer. The true question is, will Chris Paul have the validation? Will he gain the validation himself? Will he, of course, cross the threshold that he's been playing this long to achieve? And that is win a championship. That's a very good question, considering this team that he's on right now has a very good chance of winning it, considering they were just in the championship last year. So I digress, getting into what makes Chris Paul one of the greatest point guards to ever play, despite being, more than half a foot shorter than the average NBA player. He was originally born in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He would go on to play high school basketball in North Carolina, as he would go on to play college at Wake Forest. And he would come up in the same, he was a part of the same class as LeBron James, but he would end up he took the college route as LeBron went straight to the pros. Chris Paul would play his very first season at Wake Forest in the 2003-2004 season. He would go on to start all 31 of the games he played in his freshman season, in a year where of course they were led by Skip Prosser. And this would be the year where Wake Forest ended up losing to St. Joe's. However, in that first season, Chris Paul would average about 33.5 minutes per game. As a freshman, as a 6-foot freshman in college basketball, Chris Paul would average 14.8 points while shooting 50% from the field, 46% from three, while making over 1 3 a game, by the way. And he was shooting 84% from the foul line. Alongside his 15 points a game, he was averaging 3.5 assists, 6 steals, and 2.7 steals as a freshman. Following his very first season at Wake Forest, he would go on and return for what would be his second season at Wake Forest. But before that, in his first season at Wake Forest, would go on to see him be named the ACC Rookie of the Year, and he would be named to the third-team All-ACC. Following that first year, he decided he wasn't going to be a one and done, and he returned to Wake Forest. And in his sophomore season, he would start all 32 of the games he played, in a season where Wake Forest would go all the way to the second round of the division tournament, where they would end up losing there. Taking a look at how Chris Paul fared in his second collegiate season, he would go on to average about 33 minutes, just like his freshman season. He averaged 15.3 points, just half a point more than his freshman year, while shooting 45% from the field. He went on to shoot 47% from three and 83% from the foul line. Alongside his 15 points, he averaged 4.5 rebounds, 6.5 assists, and he still found a way to average 2.5 steals per game. In his second season at Wake Forest, Chris Paul would go on to be named to the first-team All-ACC after being on the third team the year before, and he was named to the consensus first team as an All-American. And following his 2 seasons at Wake Forest, he would be taken with the 4th overall pick in the 2005 NBA draft. The number 1 pick in that draft was Andrew Bogut, as Chris Paul was the second point guard taken in that draft. Deron Williams was taken just the pick before him by the Utah Jazz, as they traded with Portland to get that draft pick, as they drafted Deron Williams out of Illinois. And after his draft, Chris Paul would go on to play his first seasons with the New Orleans Hornets at the time. And the New Orleans Hornets would see their first season actually disrupted by Hurricane Katrina. So they would have to split their games between New Orleans and Oklahoma City. Regardless, Chris Paul would still go on to be named the Rookie of the Year in 2005-2006 in his age 20 season. In that season, he would start all 78 games for a New Orleans Hornets team that went 38-44. They had won 28 games more than the year before. And in that season, with Chris Paul leading the way, Chris Paul would go on to average 16.1 points while shooting 43% from the field, 28% from three, and 85% from the foul line. Alongside his 16 points, he averaged 5 rebounds, just under 8 assists and 2.2 steals a game, showing that he could do it on the offensive and defensive side. Following that very first season, New Orleans did not necessarily make the playoffs, but people were becoming more aware of who Chris Paul was, at least as a rookie. He at least was on somebody's radar. Following that 2005-2006 season, he would go on to compete with the U.S. at the FIBA World Championship in Japan. That's the only time he competed with FIBA, as the team ended up winning bronze in the very end. Following that summer stretch, Chris Paul would return to the New Orleans Hornets, who still had to play some of their games in Oklahoma because of course, Katrina. In Chris Paul's sophomore season, he would start all 64 of the games he played in a season where the New Orleans Hornets would finish with a 39-43 record. They would finish just outside of the playoffs yet again. In that second season, Chris Paul would see his minutes per game jump up about a minute. He would see his points jump up from 16 to 17 points a game as he shot 43.7% from the field, a little bit higher than what he did before. He shot 35% from three on the same amount of shots, which is a big improvement from his rookie year. He shot 82% from the foul line, and alongside his 17 points, he went on to average 4 rebounds, which is a little tick lower than what he did before. He averaged 8.9 assists in just his second year in the league, and he averaged just under 2 steals. He averaged 1.8 steals per game in the NBA. Following Chris Paul's second season, like I said, the Hornets would fail to make the playoffs, but following that season, we would start to see Chris Paul really turn a page as he took that third-year jump that many people wouldn't expect him to take. Or I guess people were expecting him to take because he was that good. In his age 22 season, Chris Paul would go on to start all 80 of the games he played in a season where the New Orleans Hornets would end up going 56-26. They would have the best. This is the only time that the Pelicans would win the Southwest Division, actually. They would finish with the second best record in the West. They would have 17 more wins than the prior year, and that was when Byron Scott was the coach of the year. Since that win, the New Orleans Hornets, or the Pelicans as a franchise, has not put up 56 wins since Chris Paul's third year there. In that season, Chris Paul would go on to average 21.1 points while shooting 48% from the field. He shot 36% from three on 1 more three taken per game, as he was making at least 1 3-pointer a game for the first time in his career. He would go on to shoot 85% from the foul line alongside his 21 points. He went on to average 4 assists. He went on to lead the NBA in assists for the first time in his career at 11.6. It will be the first time that he averaged a double-double in his career, a 20-10 double-double at that. And he went on to average 2.7 steals per game. This will be the second time in his first 3 years that he's averaged at least 2 steals per game. Following this 2007-2008 season, Chris Paul, or I guess within the season itself, Chris Paul would be named to his very first All-Star team. And at the end of the season, he would be named to the All-NBA first team. He was named to the All-Defensive second team after leading the league in steals. Not to mention that, like I said, this would be the year where Chris Paul would introduce himself to the world. Following that season, the New Orleans Hornets would end up winning, or in that first round, they would actually end up winning the first round. They beat the Mavericks 4-1. That's the first series that the New Orleans Hornets had won as a franchise. They've only won 1 series since that, and they would go on to lose in the conference semifinals to the San Antonio Spurs. This season would end up with the Lakers being the team out of the West. They ended up losing to the Celtics in 6. And following that first playoff stint, Chris Paul would, of course, be a part of that 2008 Olympics team that went into Beijing with Dwayne Wade, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, and they ended up winning the gold medal. First time he would go on to win a gold medal representing the United States, and he was still a big part of that team. But following that after that Olympic break, he would return to the New Orleans Hornets for his fourth season. In his age 23 season in New Orleans, he would go on to start all 78 games that he played in a season where the Hornets would go on to finish with a 49-33 record. They would finish with the seventh best record in the West, as they had 7 less wins than the prior season. Chris Paul would go on to average a minute more than he did the year before. At 38 and a half minutes, his fourth year in 2009 was the most minutes he'd averaged in a season. In that age 23 season, he averaged 22.8 points, which is his career high in points. He has not scored 22 points in a season since then. He would go on. He averaged nearly 23 points a game while shooting 50% from the field. He has not shot 50% from the field in any other season other than that year. He would go on to shoot 36% from three. He would go on to shoot 87% from the free throw line, as he was taking about 6.7 free throws a game, which is also a career high for him. He would go on to average 5.5 rebounds, which is his career high as well. He went on to average 11 assists. This was 1 year removed from his career high. This would be the second year in his career he averaged at least 11 assists. This would be the second year in his career that he would lead the NBA in assists. Not to mention that he would go on to lead the NBA in steals, as he had 2.8 of them. This would be the third time in his first 4 years that he's averaged at least 2 steals. In that 2008-2009 season, which would arguably go down as one of Chris Paul's bests, he would go on to make the All-Star team for the second time in his career. He would go on to make the All-NBA second team for the first time in his career. He would make the All-Defensive first team for the first time in his career. This would be the second time he made an All-Defensive team, and it'll be the second time he made an All-NBA team, establishing himself as one of the best two-way players in basketball. And then once that season would come to an end, the New Orleans Hornets would end up getting beat by the Denver Nuggets in 5 games, as this would eventually be the year in which the Los Angeles Lakers would see Kobe Bryant win his 4th NBA championship over the Orlando Magic. Following this season, Chris Paul would, of course, return to the Hornets for his 5th season in 2009-2010. In that season, he would go on to start all 45 of the games he played in a season where the New Orleans Hornets finished with a 37-45 record. They would go on to win 12 less games than the prior season, as they would go on to miss the playoffs. In that season, Chris Paul would have to deal with a couple of injuries, as he would go on to tear cartilage in his left knee. This was also after the Hornets had fired Byron Scott, and he had been visibly displeased with that. In the 45 games he played, he would go on to average 38 minutes a game. And he would go on to average 18.7 points per game while shooting 49% from the field. He would go on to shoot 40% from three for the very first time in his NBA career. He would go on to shoot 85% from the foul line as well. And once that season came to an end, alongside his 19 points a game nearly, he averaged 4.2 rebounds. He averaged 10.7 assists, making it the 3rd year in a row that he was averaging a double-double as a starting point guard. And he averaged 2.1 assists, making it the 3rd year in a row and the 4th year in his first 5 years that he's averaged at least 2 steals, which is an incredibly tough feat to do. Ask DeJounte Murray. And at the end of that season in 2009-2010, Chris Paul was named to an All-Star team for the 3rd season in his career, despite missing half the games in the season. And after that season, the Hornets, like I said, would miss the playoffs. This would lead into Chris Paul's 6th and final season with the New Orleans Hornets. In his age 25 season in 2010-2011, he would go on to start all 80 of the games he played, in a season where the New Orleans Hornets would go on to finish with a 46-36 record. They will go on to win 9 more games in the previous year. They finished with the 7th best record in the West. This is the last time that they would make the playoffs under the name of the New Orleans Hornets. But in that season, in Chris Paul's final season in NOLA, he would go on to average 36 minutes, 2 less than what he did his previous season. He went on to average 15.9 points, all while shooting 46% from the field, 38% from three and 88% from the foul line. At that point, that would be the highest free throw percentage he shot in his career. He would average 4.1 rebounds alongside his 16 points a game, as he went on to average 9.8 assists. He was 0.2 assists away from averaging a double-double for the fourth year in a row, but this would go on to be his, as a point guard, he would go on to average at least 7 assists for the first 6 years in his career. And even in that 4-year stretch, he's averaged at least 9.5. That's really tough to do. He would lead the NBA in steals for the third time in a 4-year stretch, as he averaged 2.4. It'll be the fourth year in a row he's averaged at least 2 steals, and the fifth time in his first 6 years that he's averaged at least 2. Once that 2010-11 season came to a close, the Hornets would end up losing to the Los Angeles Lakers 4-2, and this would be the season in which LeBron James would win his first champion, or they would actually this would be the year where LeBron and the Heat would end up losing to the Dallas Mavericks, as Dirk Nowitzki won his lone NBA championship. But then, following that 2011 season, after his first 6 years in New Orleans, Chris Paul would decide to play with the Los Angeles Clippers. He wanted to go to the Lakers, but of course the Lakers deal got nullified because David Stern didn't want it to happen. They would end up trading Chris Paul to the Clippers for Eric Gordon, Chris Kaman, Al-Farouq Aminu, and an unprotected Timberwolves pick, which they used to draft Austin Rivers. And once Chris Paul would get into LA, he actually played with the Clippers for quite a bit. He would play with the Clippers for 6 seasons, just like he played in New Orleans. His first of his 6 seasons in Los Angeles was his 7th year in the league, his age 26 season in 2011-2012. In that season, Chris Paul would start all 60 of the games he played, in a season where the LA Clippers would finish with a 40-26 record. Even though this was a season in which the NBA would see all teams play about like 15, 16 games left, the Clippers won 8 more games than they had won the prior year. As they had finished with the 5th best record in the West. This was the year after Blake Griffin was the Rookie of the Year. Chris Paul would go on to average about 36 minutes a game in his first season there, not far off from what he was doing in New Orleans. He was averaging 19.8 points per game. That is the most points he would ever average in Los Angeles. Alongside those 19.8 points, he went on to shoot 47% from the field, 37% from 3, and 86% from the foul line. Incredibly great numbers to shoot from that season. Alongside his 19.8 points, he averaged 3.6 rebounds, which before he had never averaged below 4 rebounds in New Orleans. He did so in his first season in Los Angeles. He would go on to average 9.1 assists. This would be the 5th year in a row that he averaged at least 9 assists per game, and this as an all-star starting point guard. He would go on to lead the NBA in steals for the 2nd year in a row, for the 4th time in a 5-year stretch. And Chris Paul would go on to average at least 2 steals a game for the 6th time in his first 7 years in the league. Once this season came to a close, or I guess in the midst of this season itself, Chris Paul would be named an All-Star for the 5th time in his NBA career. Not to mention that he was named to the All-NBA first team for the 2nd time in his NBA career. He will go on to make the All-NBA defensive first team for the 2nd time in his career. This is the 4th time he's made an All-Defensive team. And not to mention that once this season would come to an end, the LA Clippers would go to the playoffs. They would beat the Grizzlies in the first round before they ended up getting swept by the Spurs. This was the year where the Spurs would go all the way to the finals just to lose in 7 to the Miami Heat, as LeBron, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh were able to repeat. And following that 2012 loss in the playoffs, Chris Paul would go on to compete with the U.S. in the Olympics for the last time he would. He competed with them in the 2012 London Olympics, where the United States would take home the gold medal, as he played a very big part in that. But following his 2nd gold medal stint, he would return to the LA Clippers for his 2nd season with the team in his age 27 season in 2012-2013. In that season, he would start all 70 of the games he played, in a season in which the LA Clippers would finish with a 56-26 record. They had 24 more wins than their last full season, as Chris Paul would be named an All-Star and an All-Star Game MVP. That was the only time that he's been named the All-Star Game MVP in his career. He would see his numbers drop down at least 3 minutes from 36 to 33. He would average 17 points a game while shooting 48% from the field, a career low at that point, except for his rookie year, 32% from three. He would go on to shoot 88 at that point, a career high in free throw percentage. And in addition to his 17 points, he averaged 3.7 rebounds. He averaged 9.7 assists, which made it the 6th year in a row that he's averaged at least 9 assists and at least 2 steals as a starting point guard that's been an all-star. He would go on to lead the league in steals, averaging 2.4 of them. This will be the 3rd year in a row that he had done it at that point, and this will be the 5th time in a 6-year stretch. And once this season came to an end, in 2013, Chris Paul would be named to, like I said, he would be named to his 6th consecutive All-Star game. He would go on to be named to the he was named to the All-NBA first team for the 3rd time for the 2nd year in a row at that point. He would go on to be named to the All-Defensive First Team for the 3rd time in his NBA career as well. And once this season came to an end, the LA Clippers would end up losing in the first round to the Grizzlies. Following that season, this would transition into Chris Paul's 3rd season with the LA Clippers, and in his 9th season in the league, in his age 28 year, he would start all 62 of the games he played in a season where the LA Clippers would go on to finish with a 57-25 record. They had one more win than the year prior, as they would finish with the 3rd best record in the West. In Chris Paul's 3rd season there, he would go on to average about 35 minutes a game, a minute and a half more than the previous year. He would go on to average 19.1 points per game while shooting 46% from the field, 36% from three, and he would go on to shoot 85.5% from the free throw line. And alongside his 19 points, he averaged 4.3 rebounds. He went on to lead the NBA in assists for the 3rd time in his career, as he averaged 10.7. That would be the 4th time in his career that he would average double digits. It will be the 7th year in a row that he's averaged at least 9 assists. And he would go on to average 2.5 steals, as he would go on to lead the NBA in steals as well. This will be the 3rd time in his career that Chris Paul would lead the NBA in assists and steals, showing how dynamic he is as a two-way player. His 2.5 steals would go on to be the 7th year in a row and the 8th time in his first 9 years that he would go on to average at least 2 steals a game in this league. Once that season came to a close, the LA Clippers would end up beating the Warriors by 7 in the first round, right before the Warriors were the Warriors. And then they would end up losing in the conference semifinals to the Oklahoma City Thunder. This was the year in which Jamal Crawford was named the 6th man of the year. Following the season, Chris Paul would return for his 10th season in the league, which was 2014-2015, and this would be his 4th season with the LA Clippers. In that season, he would start all 82 games. This is the only time in his career that he played all 82 games. He did that in a season in which the LA Clippers would go on to finish with the 3rd best record in the West with a 56-26 record. They had one less win than the prior year. In CP's 10th year in the league, he would go on to average 34.8 points, as he averaged just about as many minutes as the year before. He would see himself average 19 points, just as much as the year before, all while shooting 48% from the field, 39% from three, and 90% from the free throw line. He shot better in all percentages while playing every single game that year. That'll be the first time he crossed the 90% free throw threshold. He would go on to average 4.6 rebounds a game. He averaged 10.2 assists, as this would be the 4th year in his career that he would lead the NBA in assists. This would be the 2nd year in a row that he did it. This would be the 5th time in his 10-year career that he would average at least a double-digit amount of assists, making it literally half of his career. And it would be the 8th year in a row that he's averaged at least 9 assists as the starting point guard. He would average 1.9 steals per game, ending his 7-year streak of averaging at least 2 steals a game. But still, 1.9 is incredibly high. That still wasn't his career low. Once the season came to an end, Chris Paul would go on to be named to his 8th consecutive All-Star game. He would go on to be named to the All-NBA second team for the second consecutive year, as after 2014, he has not been named back to the All-NBA first team. He was, however, named to the All-Defensive first team for the 5th time in his career at that point. And once this season came to an end, the LA Clippers would end up beating the Spurs in the first round, as the Spurs had won the finals the year before. The Clippers would go on to lose in the second round to the Houston Rockets. This year would, of course, go on to see the Golden State Warriors win their first title under Steve Kerr, the Warriors with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green, as they won their first title as a unit. That would be that year. Following that season, Chris Paul would return to the Clippers for his 11th season in the NBA. And in his age 30 season in 2015-16, Chris Paul would start all 74 of the games he played in a season where the Clippers would go 53-29. They had the 4th best record in the West, as Jamal Crawford would win the 6th Man of the Year for the second time in a 2-year stretch. In Chris Paul's second and final season, he would average 32.5 minutes per game, which is 2 less than what he had the year before. He would go on to average 19.5 points per game. He would go on to shoot 46% from the field. He went on to shoot 37% from 3, and he shot 89% from the foul line, pretty much shooting on par with what he was doing right before then. Chris Paul would go on to average 4.2 rebounds alongside his 19.5 points. He also averaged 10 assists. This would be the 3rd year in a row and that he would average a double-double. This would be the 6th time in his NBA career in his first 11 seasons that he would average a double-double. At that point, it was a majority of his career. He would go on to average at least 9 assists for the 9th consecutive year. It was a very tough feat to do. He would go on to average 2.1 steals per game. This would, of course, be the 8th time or the 9th time in his 11-year career that he would average at least 2 steals a game. And he would go on to be named an All-Star for the 9th consecutive year. Very tough for anyone to be named to the 9th consecutive of anything. He would be named to the All-NBA second team for the 2nd time in his career, 2nd year in a row at that point. He would go on to make the All-Defensive team for the 6th year in a row. And once that season came to a close, the LA Clippers would end up losing in the very first round to the Portland Trail Blazers in 6. But following that would lead to Chris Paul's 12th season in the NBA and his 6th and final season with the LA Clippers. In 2016-17, in his age 31 season, Chris Paul went on to start all 61 of the games he played for an LA Clippers side that went 51-31. They had won 2 less games than the prior year, as Chris Paul would go on to see his minutes drop down. He dropped down from about 32.7 to 31.5. In the 31 minutes he played per game, he averaged 18 points. He averaged 18 points while shooting 47% from the field. He shot 41% from 3, which is his career high in 3-point percentage, all while making 2 threes a game, which is also a career high for him. He went on to shoot 89% from the free throw line. That would be the 3rd year in a row that he was shooting at least 89%. Not to mention that it was the 7th year in a row that he was shooting at least 85%. 9 of the last 10 years he was doing that. He went on to average 5 rebounds per game alongside his 18 rebounds. That would be the 3rd season in his NBA career that he'd average 5 rebounds a game. He averaged 9.2 assists. That would, of course, cement the decade-long streak of averaging at least 9 assists a game, starting from 2008 through 2017. And he would go on to average 2 steals a game as well. That would be the 10th time in his 12-year career that he would average 2 steals a game. And the fact that Chris Paul was doing this was literally insane. Following this season, Chris Paul would miss out on the playoffs he missed out on the All-Star team for the first time in like a decade. He would go on to make the All-NBA first team for the 7th time in his career. He has not made an All-NBA defensive team since his last year in Los Angeles, for context. But following his 6-year stint with the LA Clippers, he would go on to play with the Houston Rockets, as he ended up getting traded to the Houston Rockets in exchange for Patrick Beverley, Sam Decker, Montrezl Harrell, Darren Hilliard, and DeAndre Liggins, Lou Williams, Kyle Whitcher, in a future first-round pick. So it was a big trade for Chris Paul. But Chris Paul would end up joining James Harden as he tried to help James Harden give the Rockets a championship. His very first season in Houston was his 13th year in the league, and in his age 32 season, he went on to start all 58 of the games he played. In a season where the Houston Rockets went 68-17. They had the best record in the West in Chris Paul's first season there. They haven't had the best record in the Western Conference while in their franchise's history until Chris Paul got there, for reference. This is the year where James Harden won the MVP and Daryl Morey won the Executive of the Year as well. And taking a look at how he would fare, it came out that he was playing through a knee injury, but in that 2017-18 season, he would go on to average about 31 minutes a game. He would average 18.6 points, all while shooting 46% from the field, 38% from three, and he shot 92% from the free throw line. That at that point would be the highest he shot. That would be the second time that he crossed the 90% threshold, as he was continually shooting the lights out from the free throw line. He would go on to average 5.4 rebounds in those 18.5 points. His 5.4 rebounds really close to his career high. He would average 7.9 assists. That would be the lowest assist that he would put together in a season at that point since his rookie year. He would go on to average 1.7 steals, as that would be his career low in steals at that point as well. In his very first season in Houston, he would fail to make the playoffs, or not that he would fail to make the All-Star team, but he did actually go on to make the playoffs. Once the Houston Rockets made it to the playoffs that year, they would end up beating the Timberwolves in 5. In their second round, they ended up beating the Utah Jazz in 5. They went to the Western Conference Finals, and after being up 3-2, Chris Paul would actually end up getting hurt, and then the Warriors would come from behind and beat them. And this is the first year in which the Warriors had Kevin Durant, or this was the second year in which the Warriors had Kevin Durant, if I'm not mistaken. Following that 2017-18 season, or at least following that loss from the Rockets, the Warriors would end up winning their third title in a 4-year stretch, as Kevin Durant took home his second NBA Finals MVP. Following that year, Chris Paul would return for his second and final season with the Rockets in his 14th season in the league. He would go on to start all 58 of the games he played for the second year in a row, and in his age 33 season, he would go on to play for a Houston Rockets team that finished with a 53-29 record. They had the fourth best record in the West, as they had 12 less wins than that previous season. Chris Paul would, of course, be dealing with some more injuries yet again, as he would go on to miss about 20 games, and he even got in an altercation with Rajon Rondo. But in that season, in his last season in Houston, he went on to average about 32 minutes a game. He averaged 15.6 points per game, which, other than this most recent season, is his career low. He went on to shoot 42% from the field. He shot, or I guess from three, he went on to shoot 36%. He would go on to shoot 86% from the foul line. Alongside his 15.6 points, he averaged 4.6 rebounds. He averaged 8.2 assists, and he went back up to averaging 2 steals a game. This would be the 11th time that Chris Paul averaged at least 2 steals a game, and he has not averaged 2 steals a game since he left Houston. Once the season would come to an end, Chris Paul would go on and help this team make it right back into the playoffs. In the playoffs, the Houston Rockets would end up beating the Jazz in the first round before they lost in 5, or they lost in 6 in the conference semifinals to the Golden State Warriors. The Warriors went all the way to the finals right before they ended up losing to the Toronto Raptors. And following his 2 seasons with the Houston Rockets, Chris Paul would end up getting traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder in exchange for Russell Westbrook, because that was a whole trade within itself. Chris Paul's lone season in Oklahoma City would go on to see him start about 31.5 minutes a game. He averaged 31.5 minutes per game. He would start all 70 of the games he played in a season in which the Oklahoma City Thunder would go on to make the playoffs. And of course, this would be the season that would see the end of it get delayed because of COVID. But before the delay happened, Chris Paul was named an All-Star. He was named an All-Star for the 10th time in his NBA career, after, of course, that missing the whole season with the Rockets. And while in that season, he would average about 31 and a half minutes per game. He would average 17.6 points. He would shoot 48% from the field, 36% from three, and he shot 91% from the free throw line. Third time in his career, he shot at least 90. All this while averaging 5 rebounds and 6.7 assists. His 6.7 assists would be his career low, and his 1.6 steals at that time was also a career low. But he was the only All-Star that helped the Thunder make the playoffs that year, as that season they finished with a 44-28 record. They would go on and lose in the first round to the Rockets, as he would go on to lose to the team that just traded him away. But following that one season stint with the Oklahoma City Thunder, like I said, he would go on to be named an All-Star for the 10th time in his career. Very tough for any player to make a decade's worth of All-Star games in itself. He went on to be on the All-NBA second team for the 4th time in his career. That was the 8th All-NBA team that he was named to. And following that lone season in Oklahoma City, he would of course find himself in Phoenix as the Thunder traded Chris Paul to the Phoenix Suns. And for the Phoenix Suns, I would argue that Chris Paul has really kind of found his place. His very first season in Phoenix was his last full season in his age 35 season in 2020-2021. In his lone full season that he's played with Phoenix, he went on to average about 31 minutes a game, on par with what he was doing in Oklahoma City. And in his 16th year in the league, he went on to average 16 points a game, all while shooting 50% from the field, 39.5% from three, which is incredibly high. He would go on to shoot 93% from the foul line, as he led the NBA in free throw shooting percentage for the only season that he's done so in his career. He did so in year 16 while making around 2.5 a game. He would go on to average 4.5 rebounds along with 16.5 points, and he averaged 8.9 assists. He averaged 1.4 steals. His 1.4 steals from last year is his career low that he's put together in a season. However, once that 2021 season came to an end, or at least within the season, he was named to his 11th All-Star team. He was named to the All-NBA second team last year. That was the 5th time that he was named to the All-NBA second team. That's the 10th time in his career that he's been named to an All-NBA team. The only time he made the All-NBA third team was in 2011. And of course, he would go on to lead the Phoenix Suns into the playoffs. They would go on to beat the Los Angeles Lakers in the first round by 6 after the Lakers won their play-in game. They would go on and beat the Nuggets. They swept the Nuggets in the conference semis 4-0. They would go on to beat the Clippers 4-2 in the Western Conference Finals. They would go all the way to the NBA Finals. They would lose to Giannis Antetokounmpo and the Bucks after the Suns picked up the first 2 wins of the series. But of course, that should give you a solid picture as to how incredibly consistent and amazing Chris Paul has been. He's literally he's entering his late 30s, and he's still one of the best players, if not the most important player on the team that had the best record in the regular season this year. Looking at where the Suns are right now, they are still competing in the playoffs right now. They are one of 8 teams that are still in contention for the 2022 NBA title. Right now, they are facing off against the 4-seed Dallas Mavericks. Right now, the Suns are leading that series 2-0, as Chris Paul has pretty much been having an incredible playoff run in this most recent season that he played. He would go on to start all 65 of the games he played in a season where the Suns would finish with the best record in the West. They would finish with the best record in the West for the first time since 2005, so it was pretty historic. So he's responsible for the Rockets. He's responsible for the Rockets having the best record in the West for the first time in a bit. Same with the New Orleans Hornets. He's responsible for the best Hornets season in their history. And not to mention that he did his part in helping the Phoenix Suns this year, as they had 64 wins. The Phoenix Suns have not had 64 wins in a season prior than this year. and looking at how Chris Paul would fare. He would go on to make his 12th All-Star game this season, by the way. He averaged 33 minutes a game. He averaged 14.7 points, which is his career low, all while shooting 49% from the field, 32% from three, and he shot 83% from the foul line. Alongside his 14.7 points, he went on to average 4.4 rebounds, and he went on to lead the NBA in assists this year for the 5th time in his NBA career, in his age 36 season, as he averaged 10.8 assists. That would be the 7th time in his 17-year career that he's averaged at least 10 assists. Not to mention that is the 11th time he's averaged at least 9 in his 17-year career. So the majority of his career, he's averaged at least 9 assists. And he went on to average 1.9 steals, as he was just away from having yet another season of averaging at least 2 steals. But that should give you an idea of who Chris Paul is at this point in his career. I can't wait to see what he does these upcoming rounds. And without further ado, I imagine that the next profile I will make of him will be a greatest of all time profile. If he wins the championship or not, Chris Paul is one of the greatest basketball players to ever play. And I just can't believe that this is a player that I grew up watching, and he's still one of the best and most influential players in basketball. There aren't a lot of players like this. With that said, if you ever get a chance to watch Chris Paul, I'd watch him before he's no longer this incredibly elite. He's wearing number 3 for the Phoenix Suns, and I imagine he's going to be around for quite a bit. He's 6 feet tall, and he's still proven to be this dynamic of a player, showing that he's a very smart player. He knows how to use his body well, and he's just an incredible pound-for-pound basketball player who deserves his credit, who deserves his roses, and at the end of the day, he's going to deserve his jacket. So with that said, I do want to wish Chris Paul a happy 37th birthday. And with that said, I want to thank everyone for listening to this piece. I want to thank the NBA and college basketball reference websites for giving me the NBA, college basketball, and pro basketball reference websites for giving me all the facts and figures that I need. And with that said, thanks once again for listening to my piece. I hope all is well. Once all of today's exhibitions are done, I'm going to come back tomorrow on May 7th. And of course, with that said, I want to thank everyone for listening. I hope all is well, and I'll catch you with more tomorrow. And hopefully I'll have another profile on Chris Paul this time next year. Peace out.